An invasive seaweed is threatening Fiordland's underwater, and conservation groups are worried that money used to fight it will soon dry up. Undaria has established itself in many parts of New Zealand over the past 20 years and showed up in Fiordland about 10 years ago. Logan Church reports.
Fiordland's crystal waters and colourful marine life are the envy of the world. But underneath the waterline, an innocent-looking seaweed is putting everything at risk. For Dr. Rebecca McLeod, the fight against Undaria has been a years-long battle.
It first found its way into Fiordland about 10 years ago, we think on the hull of a boat, and it originally was thought to only just be in this one little cove in Fiordland called Sunday Cove. And so there was a program to try and eradicate the seaweed from Sunday Cove, and that went on for a good number of years. And then only a couple of years ago, we unfortunately discovered a much larger incursion up in Breaksea Sound, which extended a few kilometres in size.
Rebecca McLeod heads the Fiordland Marine Guardians. To combat the weeds, described as the gorse of the sea, 3 public agencies, the local regional council, DOC and Biosecurity New Zealand, came in and have been fighting back. Those 3 agencies collectively chip in $200,000 a year, but
the challenge for us is that the funding streams that have been funding a large portion of this program have disappeared because of COVID.
In particular, Rebecca is referring to the Southland Regional Council, who's seen funding for work like this dry up due to a big drop in levies from cruise ships this year.
We're working through budgets and things like that internally as to what we can afford, but the scale of this now is too big for ES to be able to keep funding at a level needed to really deal with Undaria and Breaksea Sound.
That's Ellie Meads, Biosecurity and Biodiversity Operations Manager at the Regional Council. She says collective funding needs to increase 5-fold to make sure Undaria is kept under control.
That would get more divers in the water, get them in the water more regularly, but also gives opportunity to survey, look for new potential sites and get them before they get out of control, really look at boats to make sure people aren't bringing other stuff in.
So, an increasingly invasive weed and funds to fight it drying up. Biosecurity NZ says in a statement it remains committed to managing Undaria and Fiordland, and there are upcoming talks in the coming weeks when future funding will be discussed. DOC's Principal Ranger for Biodiversity in Te Anau, Tony Preston, agrees more funding is needed to combat this weed going forward.
The current DOC contribution is secure as any funding is in a government environment. Certainly challenging times ahead for New Zealand as a country with the cost of covering the government's COVID response. But notwithstanding, we certainly have identified that to contain the Undaria in Breaksea Sound, we are going to require further funding in the future. That could come from a myriad of sources.
An application for the government's Jobs for Nature Fund has gone in to try and get some of that funding. Rebecca McLeod says the cost of not getting this under control is just too high.
We would expect the beautiful, colourful and extremely diverse underwater environment that we see at the moment, all these incredible animals that crust onto the rock walls, will just be smothered in Undaria. And that could have serious implications for not just for the aesthetics of the place, but the wider ecosystem, which obviously supports a really productive fishery in Fiordland as well, and a really productive tourist market as well.
For Checkpoint, Logan Church.